Good afternoon. My name is Josh Cohen. I am the co-host of the Movement podcast and National Director of Policy at TransLoc. I am a 40-ish year old male with brown hair and a blue shirt on.
And I'm L'erin Jensen, the other co-host of the Movement podcast. I have dark curly hair, a blue denim shirt. I'm in my 30-ish-year-old woman. I hope you guys are enjoying the conference. Josh and I are excited to be here to echo some of what you learned on Tuesday. This week's theme is financial and funding systems, and we'll certainly dig into that and more today.
All right. So let's maybe start out first here, just introducing you a little bit to the Movement podcast. It is a weekly conversation that L'erin and I have with leaders who are building the equitable, accessible, and verdant mobility future that we all deserve.
Oh, my turn. Sorry. For those who haven't checked out the Movement podcast, you can find it on TransLoc's website, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you find your podcast. We talk to industry leaders, elected officials, and local advocates to better understand what it takes to build the equitable, accessible, and verdant mobility future we all want. The Movement podcast is a project of TransLoc, a transportation as a service technology company, and part of the innovation branch of Ford Motor Company. We help transit providers make smarter operational decisions, predict and plan for dynamic transit needs, and create customizable transit solutions.
All right. So I'm going to stop sharing there and we're going to go ahead and get started. So building on what we talked about a little bit before, what we're going to talk about today is what it takes to build that equitable, accessible, and verdant mobility future. And unlike normal weeks where we're talking to just one guest, we're actually going to put y'all in the interview seat this week. So y'all are going to be our guinea pigs this week. You're going to contribute to this conversation. So that's why we said go ahead and turn those cameras on, and we'll get your mics on here in just a minute. But what we're trying to do is figure out what we need to do in that shared pursuit of equitable mobility for all.
We'll also be using the chat feature throughout the day to have you share with us. If you haven't already, will everyone go ahead and put their name, physical location, and go ahead and tell us your favorite flavor of ice cream as well in the chat.
All right, so you're going to start with your favorite flavor of ice cream, L'erin?
Yeah, strawberry, I think.
Strawberry, really?
Yeah, or Ben & Jerry's Half Baked is also really good.
Ben & Jerry's Half Baked. Okay, so I'm going to go with coffee ice cream. I'm a sucker for just that, just sweet and creamy, but it's like reminds me of my morning coffee. So
you probably like butterscotch candy too then, don't you?
No, that's a little bit much for me. Hannah, what about you?
So I'm a Moose Tracks girl. I really love the peanut butter cups in there. So that's my go-to.
Okay, good. All right, so seeing some folks pipe in there in chat. So let's see. We got some vanilla. Thank you, Benji. Blueberry pie ice cream. That's a new one. Holland, Michigan. I like that. Jay, blueberry cheesecake. All right, I've seen some blueberries. This is good. Cooking dough or butternut from Mackenzie. Wonderful. Chocolate peanut butter. Okay, good. Sarah. All right, so we've got a wide variety here, although a couple of the blueberry flavors, which I was maybe not expecting. So go figure. Well, good. All right. So other logistics. You're working on turning your video on. We're going to keep asking you that so we can see your beautiful faces. We're going to get to the interactive portion in just a second, where you're going to be discussing some of the questions that we're going to be talking about in smaller groups. So obviously you'll want to turn your microphone on when we do that. So you can go ahead, L'erin. I was just like sewing over to you. So
since this week is the week of finance and funding, let's orient ourselves with two of our favorite quotes. The first is by then Senator Joe Biden in 2008. Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value. The second quote is from author James Baldwin, my favorite author, in a 1966 essay. I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. Fast forward to today, President Joe Biden proposed trillions of dollars of infrastructure that intended to blunt the auto-dominant approach to transportation that has ruled the day for the last half century. But it wasn't meant to be. So we want to hear from you guys. What are some tangible things you are seeing done at a local level to align budgets with community priorities, especially around mobility?
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to send you to breakout rooms. Oh my gosh, breakout rooms. This is the part where it's interactive. Okay, so we're going to send you to breakout rooms and you're going to spend 10 minutes together discussing this in your group. I don't know exactly how big the groups are going to be. It doesn't really matter. It'll be fine. And so when we're done, we'll ask a couple of groups to share maybe some interesting insights. We'll give you a chance to raise your hand. There's the raise your hand feature in Zoom. I'm sure you've all used. It's in the reactions area down on the bottom. If you can't do that, maybe you can put it in chat. If you don't feel comfortable talking on mic, that's okay too. You can put it in chat. But we want to hear your voices here. So the question again, what are some of the tangible things you are seeing done at a local level to align budgets with community priorities, especially around mobility? And so, what we're going to ask SumC folks to do, our SumC behind the scenes folks who are doing such a great job keeping everything running this week and all the weeks here during the big shift. Will you please send folks off to breakout rooms for 10 minutes random? And we'll have cameras on, folks, and unmuted, and you'll get to have that conversation there for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back in and we'll chat a little bit. All right?
Thanks, Josh. I'm going to create the breakout rooms now. And if you are able to pop in and maybe just let the groups know the questions again, that might be helpful too, to just keep everyone remembering the initial question. So we'll see everyone in the breakout rooms, and then we'll join back in 10 minutes.
All right. So we had a few minutes to discuss what some of those tangible things we're seeing done at a local level to align budgets with community priorities, especially around mobility. So now if we could get some volunteers to share some of those things that were discussed.
All right, this is the fun part where y'all get to give your perspective. You can raise your hand with the reaction thing. You can raise your hand like this. You can just come off mute and just give us your 2 cents. You can put it in chat. We'll take it whatever way you get it, but we're expecting something because you're here in this room and we're expecting something. So who's going to be the guinea pig that's going to come off mute or raise their hand first? That's going to give their perspective.
I see some stuff in the box. It looks like Macy may have been in the middle of a really good conversation. Macy, Mackenzie, anybody want to share? If not, that's okay too.
Sure. This is Mackenzie Love. Thanks for setting this up. I'm sorry I wasn't prepared to have my camera on.
That's okay.
Thank you. So I live in Northern Virginia, and I work for a regional entity. And one of our member jurisdictions, Alexandria, actually has a new program to have fare-free transit. And I don't have a great deal of details, and it's kind of evolving right now, but that's kind of an exciting movement to see a city that already offers many mobility options, but is trying to be attentive to the needs of various users of those modes and make them more accessible to more people, to take such a big step like that. So that was the first thing that came to mind when you gave us the prompt. And then the thing Macy and I are talking about as the what is that called? Breakout rooms ended. She's telling me about, we both kind of lived in smaller areas when we were younger and then moved to these bigger cities. I think she works for you also. She's in Chicago. And then I used to live in rural Appalachia, and we're talking about how do you make some of these balances between or work through some of these shared mobility options in more rural areas versus urban. And there are many different challenges, but one of the things you're talking about is there's been some concern in my current region about balancing the need for mobility options and the concerns about sidewalk clutter and ADA access from other folks. And one thing that some of the jurisdictions here are trying is either corrals, third-party corrals for things like scooters, but also tethering, which I thought was really interesting, where you have like a locking device on, say, a scooter that can be wrapped around a pole and not a tree. to lock them to some infrastructure and thus have a proxy for getting them out of the walk or rolling space. So that's what the chat was about. Thanks for setting this up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Who's next? All right, Stephanie.
Hi, I work for the city of Cambridge in Massachusetts, and this isn't a budget line item that our stats, the mobility planning staff has had approved. But one thing that we all have, I'm sure anyone who works for a city knows that we're all, double booked on everything. So we all do 2 or 3 jobs, and we have all come together as the mobility staff to dedicate a portion of our work plan to doing community engagement in a different way than we ever have before. So now we're going to, we're launching an ongoing relationship building sort of shift in community engagement than we used to do, this thing that I think probably a lot of all white planning agencies have done, which is we have a project, we think of things, we go to the community, we ask for them to say, yes, we like that. But now we are, and the reason we haven't done anything different in the past is because it takes a lot of time and energy to do a proper community engagement process, which is really connecting with a diverse group of people and not just the neighborhood associations, which already hold a lot of power in our community. So the shift for us is just adjusting our work plans, which seems like a small thing, but in the face of a lot of competing tasks that we have to do for city council, et cetera, it's a really big shift for us. And it's made me very excited. It's reinvigorated me in my planning job.
That's awesome. That echoes a little bit of what Dr. Destiny Thomas shared with us in episode 73. The way she framed it was planners should come from communities, be ever present in them, and our ideas and concepts should be generated through longstanding communication and dialogue with those communities. So I think it's getting right at that issue of like, how do we make this not from a lumpy, like one time or once every year period of community engagement, but an ongoing, like rooted in the community approach. So thank you very much for sharing that. We have time for maybe one more before we wrap and go to the next one. Any other folks want to jump in real quick on this most recent topic? And Stephanie, there is a line in chat that you may want to maybe respond to. Perhaps what kinds of things are you doing differently to keep the dialogue going? So that may be a good opportunity for you to respond in chat on that, as well as we move on, I think, to our next question.
Maybe I'll just add, this was something that we haven't observed necessarily, but that to bridge the gap or to make it easier for people to afford e-bikes, like small micromobility loans, something that we should explore and see if that's an option. Just to make them more accessible. They've already come down in price, but how do we make them even more accessible? So that was not observed yet, but hoping to maybe see it.
Awesome.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, so I guess let's just go ahead and move on. So using this Echo Thursday as a bridge between this week's topic of financing and funding to next week's topic of policy and institutional systems, let's talk about climate change. The recent weather phenomenon in Texas this winter and the Pacific Northwest this summer portend a future shaped by climate change that will impact mobility for billions of people around the world. And while climate change is global, we have to take action at the local levels. So there's no shortage of ideas on what we could do to address those issues, like more investment in public transit and electric micromobility. So the question isn't what we do, but how do we do it? So how would you guys try to get these types of major changes, more investment in public transit and electric micromobility, implemented in your own communities?
So the question is, obviously we need to do something to address climate change, right?
Right.
So the question is not what to do, because we know what to do, right? The question is how to do it, right? How are we going to get the increased investment in public transit? How are we going to get the increased access to shared electric micromobility? What are some of the how things that we can do to help make that a reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all boils down to ease of use and time competitive nature. So if it's hard for me to drive my car downtown and park it, or if it's expensive, and if it's just as easy for me to jump on the bus and ride in, then I'm going to choose jumping on the bus if it's easier and cheaper. So I do that like almost every day, not today because I'm at home, but we recently moved our offices downtown and we have an East Austin office and I live in East Austin. So, and my daughter's daycare is at our East office. So I take the little one to the office and then I get on the bus and ride in because it's $16 a day to park downtown. So I think just making, it's a land use and it's the cultural kind of change where we have to decide that we're going to make it harder to drive. It's challenging in Texas, I think, but I think it's just a cultural shift.
All right. What do you think, Jackie, Kathleen, Nate, Sarah?
I agree with the ease of use. We're in a very small, we're on the shores of the lake and we're surrounded by farmland. So if you want to go to Grand Rapids, which is a large medical center, it's like going to the moon if you don't have a car. It's that hard. We don't really have Uber and Lyft here very much. Someone told me to go from our town to downtown Grand Rapids on Uber was $150 one way.
Wow.
So if you're lower income, that's just not an option. What we're facing right now is we're very short staffed. We don't have enough people here. There's a greater need than we have drivers. And also there's resistance. There's a lot of NIMBY going along here. We had one person, we had to temporarily change a bus stop because of construction, and somebody came out and said, I didn't pay $300,000 for a house to have a bus stop in front of it. So, those kind of attitudes. We do have protected bike lanes. Our city council is very good about, there's a big push right now for building some lower income housing, which we really badly need. But I'd say here it's more attitudes than money. I'd say the money is there. It's just the attitudes. Also bad manners on the part of bicyclists and traffic. We have something called the ghost bike, which it's a white bike they put out to mark deaths. And there's been way too many of them in our small town. But my job is to try to do that last mile, the micromobility issues. And what I keep running into is cost.
The actual, which cost, like where in the chain of cost is the challenge?
We're also a tourist town. So looks are very important to the community. And we're also a college town. So the cost is the people that live here don't want to pay for something that they aren't going to use. The people who ride the bus right now are the people that have to. Everybody here has those big trucks you're talking about, or the little sports cars. It's Michigan, so people have their summer car and they have their winter car, not just a car. There is biking, but it's more recreational than, I see people doing it for exercise, not because they have to get to work. We have a lot of factories. We have a lot of people that need to get to work, and bikes are expensive. Bikes get stolen, things like that. But sorry, I'm getting off topic a little bit. But yeah, just the community being convinced that these bike sharing programs are worth it.
Okay. Interesting. Kathleen, I know you came in a little bit late. I just want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. If you want to just say hello and tell us where you're coming in from, and if you have any perspectives on this question.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry, I'm not ready for video ready, but
no problem. You're fine.
Appreciate it. So I mentioned this in the last little roundtable that I'm coming from Philadelphia. I've been I previously was an executive director of a development corporation and was asked to help bring the bike share program in Philadelphia to our community, which is considered Philadelphia proper still. And it's part of what's called the Northwest. Philadelphia is divided into north, south, northwest, northeast, and it's referred that way. So I'm an outsider. I'm from Michigan, originally from Detroit. But at any rate, so what I thought was going to be an easy check the box turned out to be a 3-year slog to try to get bike share past the center city limits where it's, concentrated in the urban center of Philadelphia. So I actually got picked up by a developer who has really an interesting vision about micromobility and transportation, and I've been working with them on it. I'm now at a phase where we've included 7 communities in the Northwest that are all interested, and they're varying different geographies and demographics and whatnot. And I refer to it as an equity e-bike share because it really does represent communities that have been historically shut out of easy, accessible, and convenient transportation. And one of the challenges is the Northwest has some of the highest elevated areas in the city. So an e-bike, not an analog, but an e-bike is really the only way to go. So I'm on my third, we would break it into 3 phases, roll it out that way. And I'm now sitting down with, I don't know if anyone's familiar with JOCO. They're kind of the disruptor right now in New York City. They've disrupted the city bike, e-bike portion of their program. And they're very interested. They're coming next week. We're going to ride it out and literally physically ride it around so they understand, because these are New Yorkers. You know, Philadelphia is kind of like Wisconsin still, you know, it's a completely different animal. You know, they're funded by, you know, they have VC funding. I think they have private funding. I mean, that's pretty much the funding model I've been going after. We originally looked at subsidized model, but after the pandemic, I'm representing a lot of local CDCs, community development corporations, and small businesses, as well as universities were really hit too by the pandemic. These were all, I mean, a lot of these main streets have been, a lot of them are shuttered. So I can't really go to people now at this point and ask them to pony up and support a bike share program. And at any rate, so the idea is not a strictly, there's a lot of big biking culture here in the Northwest because of the hills. It's not really targeting elite cyclists or people that already have their bikes. It's really looking at, you know, doing that last mile commute.
For sure.
Putting people closer to the rail system, which is really, I'm sorry if there's any other Philadelphian on, but it's pretty bad. And it's very expensive, $7 one way to get into the city from where I am. So it's, you know.
So it's all relative though, because, you know, where we are in North Carolina, we have no rail. So, you know, I would take expensive rail over no rail at this point, but
people that I represent can't afford that, obviously.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Regular way of commuting. So yeah, so, you know, that's the idea, to really make it accessible. Like I said, we're going to roll it out in 3 phases, one along the river corridor, and then moving further and further out into the Northwest. So stay tuned. I'll let you know how it goes. I'm, you know, like I said, I'm in meetings, you know, I've been in meetings with JOCO, but they're coming here. We're going to be looking at it, you know, at a granular level and sitting down with some of the developers and businesses that are supporting it and part of the stakeholder group.
We talked about user experience and really presenting what a city, a community could look like to policymakers or decision makers, and even the community, in a way that they could really understand. So like telling the story visually, really simple way, people can see 10 years out, like what the impact of this will look like.
Yeah, just to build off that, sorry, I was just waiting for if there was anyone else to that was going to go as startups off. But yeah, essentially, I think that what L'erin, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, L'erin, is that right?
You've got it.
What I was trying to say was, I think, at least like at my young age, I don't see a lot of design and designly ways of planning transportation as much as, you know, we see just more focus on like we were talking, like these big reports that talk about quantitative facts and things like that, which have their own place and are important. But if we can use things that are sort of exploding right now, like for example, user experience design, where we bring it to these places to story tell to the people and understand what these futures can look like, that could be a really powerful way of making people understand what your vision for the future is, and then bringing that vision back to certain grants and funding for today to be able to, you know, get those major changes in that major funding.
I love that. I love that perspective. Thank you for sharing that. And I think L'erin and I probably talked about something recently about that. I always forget whether it's on something we've already recorded and it's already out. I'm not sure, but around making it, helping people see how easy it is to use something, right? And how can we bring that perspective there and make it as easy as possible? And that was actually a topic that came up in our small group, from Nadia, shared from Austin, about how do we make it harder to do these other things that we don't want people to do and easier to do the things we do want them to do. So, and I think design kind of comes into that a little bit. All right, we have time for maybe one more perspective here. Who's going to be the lucky person who wants to jump in before we move to our final breakout group? I'm looking at somebody. Come on, who's going to do it? Sarah looks like she wants to talk. No.
Well, we just talked a little bit about like for scooter and bike shares, whether it's publicly funded or privately funded, which is kind of not something I'm super familiar with how that works, but seems that it's better when it's publicly funded. And like, for example, in Seattle, we've got Spin coming in and trying to get like a building to pay for a docked scooter location. So it's a weird way of coming at it where, I don't know, the locations will be kind of random then. It's not super well thought through of like, these are the destinations where we need a scooter station. It just becomes a little bit more random and probably won't be as good for users. And then I have questions of like, who will maintain that? And if the scooter share company leaves, like, is it just an empty station? So we were just talking a little bit about that world of things.
Those are good questions. And we talked about financing a little bit in our group as well. All right, well, let's move on to our last group. We got one more, and we're going to get you out of here at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. So another theme that has emerged over and over in our discussions at the Movement Podcast, and certainly here at SumSea, I know it's important, is equity. And so for far too many of our fellow humans, access to basic mobility is limited by the color of their skin, by the language they speak, or their physical abilities. So the question for now is, what tactical things can you recommend that we do to ensure that the freedom of movement for all is a reality? So tactical things that you can recommend that we can do to ensure that the freedom of movement for all is a reality.
I think this is a very fun question because equity gets thrown around a lot as an idea, but it is never really actionable, and it's never really tied to anything other than sort of just this almost ritualistic desire to include it. And folks don't put a lot of thought into this. This is a great question in the sense also that it is an enormous series of policy mechanisms and societal mechanisms that create a system where certain people do not have the same mobility as others. Coming from a town or from a city with a very large policing problem, for us, like one of the bigger barriers outside of economics is obviously the disproportionate way that policing occurs in Minneapolis. You can see this in like data very easily with like guns being drawn as exclusive, like disproportionately on people of color. So like I think of this as a lot of a policing issue as like a big part of this, and it's a very unfun conversation because, as we talked about in our last breakout group, politicians want low-hanging fruits and they want to increase selection, but they don't really care about choice. And I think that this has to be a conversation that planners are willing to take on, is that like we have to consider how policing interacts with our ability to provide service.
That's just a really fascinating perspective. And this has less to do with planning, not what you're talking about. What I'm about to say has less to do with planning, but I think like one of the simple things that help mitigate that, we had someone on the podcast a few weeks ago from Bike Walk, Kansas City, and named Michael Kelly, the executive director there. I believe he may not be the executive director. It doesn't matter. Michael Kelly from Bike Walk, Kansas City. And they helped make jaywalking, like take the criminalization out of jaywalking. Like that's one of the things. Black and brown people are disproportionately ticketed for jaywalking. And that absolutely restricts your mobility, your ability to move around freely if you're being ticketed for jaywalking while others aren't. Like, I mean, you're just crossing the damn street. And it's not something that I had ever really thought about prior to. I remember as a kid being kind of paranoid about it, but like now I'm like, I'm gonna cross the fucking street, excuse my language. But I've also never received a ticket for it. So I love that you kind of flipped the question on its head and really brought in an entirely different perspective.
One thing that I've been talking about with my colleagues is in this effort to understand people's mobility needs better before we come to people with solutions. One small example that came up, it was when people have to go visit or need to go visit family or friends who are imprisoned, and the prisons are all located really far outside the city, and they don't have a car, and they don't want to pay, they can't pay really high Uber and Lyft prices to go, it automatically prevents that group of people from being able to travel freely. So the idea that we would, in order, the tactical things to do to help people to ensure freedom of mobility, the first thing we have to do is figure out what are the types of trips people want to be able to make that they can't make, and then answer that. So I don't have an exact answer because I haven't asked the question yet.
No, I think that's really important. And it speaks to what Raymond was saying at the beginning, though. Like when we talk about equity, we kind of talk about this like boogeyman almost. I mean, that's the ideal we're reaching for, but like we don't have anything tangible to speak about. Like, okay, well, what does equity look like? And what about it isn't equitable? So we need to ask the questions like, what does equity actually look like? And then work backwards from there, like to find the solution, I think, getting to the root of it so that we can eventually figure out what it is that like we're really working towards.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure, L'erin, you weren't able to catch Renee's presentation just before this one, but she was talking about just sort of an informal survey that she did to people, asking them why they don't bike. And she was anticipating everyone saying, the lack of bike lanes and that the traffic is, scary. But that was sort of one of the last things that came up. Before that was, I don't know how to bike. I'm too old to bike. I'm not in shape enough to bike. A lot of things that I think also have to do with identity and less maybe, of course, protected bike lanes. Like for me, I'm comfortable on a bike. If there's protected bike lanes, I'm much more likely to bike. But if you're not even, comfortable with the bike as an object to begin with, there's a lot that can happen between getting a bike, being comfortable on a bike, and actually getting on the road. And some of those things I think do have to do with identity.
For sure. I think when we're talking about biking, we're talking about more of a sport almost than a mode of transportation. I think people who do bike a lot, it's optional. Like in many ways, it's like a luxury to ride a bike. Like that means you have to be in a place where like the places that you need to go and the things that you need to get are bikeable to. And it's typically, it's like a white male sport, I think, like upper middle class white male sport. So for sure, I think those are really, really good questions and answers, and not something I've thought about. Did you have some good conversations in your room, Josh?
Well, of course. Yeah, one of the things that really came up, which I highlighted just in the conversation that we had with Wafia Murray from Philadelphia a couple months ago, when we were talking about bike lanes. That was kind of a concept that kind of came up in bike share and so forth. And really the question really that came up is, who is this for, right? Is it for those members of the community? Is it for some politician to help them get reelected? Is it for the tourism department? Could be any or all of those, and they're not mutually exclusive, but it is a good question to ask. So that was definitely like a kind of a theme that kind of came out that I heard that really stuck with me. What about you and your group?
Yeah, there was some fantastic conversations, and they really took it in a direction I wasn't expecting. We started talking about that, like, we need to talk about policing when it comes to mobility. Like people, if there's an over policing problem, it really restricts the way that people move about. And that moved into like people who are incarcerated or who have family members who are incarcerated. And prisons being located in really out of the way places with nothing around, and like, you know, like Solano, California, in the middle of the desert or wine country or whatever it is. And so the question though that we need to ask though, we need to start at the very beginning. Like, where do people want to go that they're unable to get to? Like, how do we improve transit or mobility if we don't even know where people are trying to get to? So,
wow. All right. I think just based on time, I think we're probably gonna need to wrap it up here. Thank you. This has been so inspiring to have us be able to hear directly from you on some of these perspectives on what we can do to tackle some of these big issues. And these are the types of issues that are getting in the way of that freedom of movement for all that certainly L'erin and I are passionate about.
Yeah, this was certainly, I think, one of the better sessions that we've done. So this was exciting for me, but this doesn't have to be the end. You guys can check us out on the Movement Podcast, where Josh and I have similar discussions like this every week with leaders just like you.
So thank you so much for joining us. And, you know, certainly I'm happy to stick around here until they kick us out if anybody has any other questions or wants to chat about things otherwise. But until then, we'll see you next time.